The rose we're going to make this time is a wild rose, or sometimes it's known as an English briar rose or a dog rose. I think it's one of the most delicate and beautiful roses there is. And this is what we're going to make now. We're going to make 2 full blooms, and we're going to make a half bud and a bud. When I mean half bud, I mean it's coming open. So this is our project now. To make this, we'll need some pink paste, which I've already mixed, some yellow paste for the centre, and some green paste for a calyx. So we'll start off by actually making the calyx. I want my tools, which is my rolling pin and my corn flour, and I'm going to put a little on the board so it doesn't stick. Now the thing is, for this, you don't want to make it too thin. The calyx needs to have a little bit of substance to it, because you'll see that if I show you a flower that I made earlier, it actually forms the base of the flower, so therefore it wants to be a little bit of a support in it. So what we're going to do is to cut out a calyx, which I've used the rose calyx, the same sort of cutter that we use for the traditional rose, and again smooth the edges so that you get any extra paste off it, and it's a nice clean cut. So because we want it as a support, and because it's behind and we don't really see it when the flower is assembled, it doesn't matter if it's smoothed or if it's actually the edges are made smooth. So this is what we've got. Now we'll want to put, if you can see, we'll need to put a wire through that calyx. So what we'll do, we've got to leave the calyx to dry. So I have quite a large pin here, it's quite a thick one, and I'm going to put a hole through the centre of it. Make it quite a decent hole, because you've got to thread the wire through it. And what I've done is I've got a container here that you use for keeping your eggs in the refrigerator. Now I look around for all sorts of gadgets to dry my flowers on, and I find this is quite good, because now I want a fairly shallow curve, so I put a bit of tissue, no, I put some foil in the bottom of it, tissue. But if I wanted a deeper shape, I could let it go to the bottom. So this is a very, very useful little gadget. So we'll leave that, and it needs to dry overnight, so it's really, really hard. Right, the next stage of making this wild rose is to make this centre. And it's like a little knob of paste on top of a wire with lots of little stamens put into the paste. So how we do that is to take a little bit of paste, and we're going to roll it into a ball again, a pea-sized ball, perhaps a little tiny bit more. And once it's smooth, I'm just going to flatten it slightly. So you've actually got that shape. You've flattened it slightly. Now the next stage is to bend the wire that's going to go into the back of it. What you do is you take a 24 green wire, 24 gauge green wire, and I'm going to bend it over at the top to make a hook, and then halfway up the hook I'm going to bend it again so it comes at right angles. So I've done several, so I'm sure you can see what they're like. They've been bent, the hook has been bent halfway along at right angles. And what we do is we're going to dip it into our edible glue, and I'm going to put it into the top of this paste, sink it in, and then I'm going to make sure to cover the wire over so that it doesn't come out. So we now have the little flattened button for the centre. Now here I've got some little stamens which, if you can see, they've all been stuck around this little button, and I've cut. I started off with 2 long stamens, if you can see the 2 long ones there, and I've cut them into pieces so I can actually get hold of them and stick them into the centre. You have to have a steady hand for this. And I make a row around the edge. I've got a sticky pair of tweezers, I'll get another pair. You actually may be able to do it without tweezers, but unfortunately I've got rather large hands, large fingers. And I learned from a very early age to use tools to do my work. So I've gone all the way round, and then I'll make another row a little further up. And keep going round doing this until you've got enough round the edge. And I have actually added a few ones with the knobs on the end, so it gives you a feeling of. And I've gone round and done that until I've achieved that look. And as you see, you can see how it looks on the actual rose itself. This is where we're going to actually prepare our petals. And when I say prepare them, because once your calyx is drying, or has dried thoroughly, and remember your centre also needs to dry for 24 hours. We're going to place the petals around the calyx and leave them to dry slightly, and then we'll add the centre. So I'm going to take some nice pale pink paste, which the wild rose is normally a pale pink, and for this one I've got a really pretty heart-shaped cutter. So this is the heart-shaped leaf, petal on the wild rose. One thing I can give you a tip about when you're using very pale, well, any flower place really, is that if you actually wear a jumper or a fleece or anything like that has a pile on it, you will find that the bits will come off and go into your paste. So I do advise you to wear something that's cotton while you're working. The paste seems to pick up everything. You need to make that really nice and fine. And then we're going to cut out 5 for each flower. So for this one we actually had 2 blossoms in our spray, so you will need to make 2 of them. So right, this is the Again, smooth around the edges and just pop it through. Just to get any surplus off, because if not you'll have a ragged edge and it doesn't look very nice. And that's the 5th one. I'm going to put my paste away in my store so it's ready for next time. And I'm going to pop the petals that I'm not going to work on into some cling film. Now with these, what we're going to do is I'm going to get my favourite brush and I'm going to put a little bit of corn flour on it, and I'm going to roll out the edges so that they are very thin and wavy. And then I'm going to take hold of it and I'm going to, with my ball tool, I'm going to just slightly hollow it out so it takes on that petal shape. I'll cover it lightly with the cling film so it doesn't dry out too quickly, because I want to shape it into the calyx and put it in a former. Again, I know lots of people work on a pad when they come to shaping the tools, and you can choose to work on a rigid foam pad. In other words, they have it down on the table and they work it on the pad, but I find I've got far more control by having it in my hand. I never could work on a pad. I did actually try, so that before I started this video I was going to try and see if I could actually do it, but it just doesn't work. I just don't have the control that I like, so I'm afraid it's my hands. But everybody finds their own way of working, and I'm sure when you get used to doing it all you will find your own methods. It doesn't take very long. Ooh, sticking a little bit. They're so pretty, they're really worth the effort to make. And of course, I've done them, which is more or less natural size, but if you've got a very large cake and you only want to put one spray on it, you can make larger blossoms. You can choose to make them much larger if you wish. I tend to work on rather smaller things, but they're equally as beautiful if you make larger ones. And again, we're going to smooth the centre of this out, just to hollow it out and give it a little bit of rose shape. Now what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to mount it into that calyx, and to do that I want a little bit of glue, and each petal I'm going to paint the back off with the glue, and put it into the calyx. I'm going to put it to the hole, and I'll open the hole up again afterwards so that we can get the centre through it. And that's the second one. You've really got to guide where to put them, because you've got the number of portions of your calyx there that you can follow. Again, the back of it. and that one, and the last one you want to just pop him underneath that one so that it looks natural, because that's the natural way they lay. So that needs to come up, which I will do with and just pop that over the top. And I'm going to make that hole through the centre. Again, make sure that it's there. Well, I've slipped that one slightly when I tucked it under, but it doesn't matter. Okay, and here I've folded a little bit of tissue over just to give it a form and to sit on and give it that shape. So just a little bit of tissue paper which I've rolled up, made into a knot, and then I've got a little former for it. And I'll make sure that I've got this centre through it. And I would leave it to dry overnight so that it's easier for you to handle. It gives it that little shape. If you want it slightly deeper, then you could use again one of these. I showed you how to do that in case you hadn't got one, but you could actually use that to do it in as well. So as I say, these egg containers from the refrigerator are marvellous. You can do everything with them. Right, now we're going to make the buds. Now this is a different way to make a rose centre. Before I showed you how to make this centre, which was the cone, which is the traditional way for making sugar flowers, is to make it onto a cone. If you look on our resource section, you will find that you can actually buy artificial ones to put in the centre of your sugar roses, so you don't actually have to go to the trouble of making them. But I've got a different type of centre to show you here, which I devised myself, which I thought that was much prettier and more delicate than having the cone in the centre. So I'll show you how to make it. I start off with a pea-sized piece of paste, which I've rolled into a ball. And this is slightly larger than the traditional rose centre was, because I'm going to make it for these roses, these wild roses, which are slightly larger. So I've got it to the pea shape. Now I'm going to roll it so that it's elongated and it's almost a cigar shape. So I've rolled it out in two narrower ends. So what I do now is I'm going to take a paintbrush, or if you prefer to work with the cocktail stick, then that's your choice. But I prefer this, and I'm going to roll it so I actually form a D shape. Now I'm going to work that with my fingers and get that to a nice D shape, and this end slightly ridged, and that will form the same base as we had with our cone. So you've got the wider base to put the petals around. Now I'm going to lay that on my hand, and I'm actually going to smooth the outside edge so it's very thin and slightly wavy, but the main idea is to get that quite thin. And you don't want this too thick, because you're going to roll this in a minute, so it's going to form the rose centre, but a much more pretty one than the other. So then we want a 24 wire, which we're going to make a hook on the end as usual, so it doesn't come out of our centre. And then we're going to take this, and with a paintbrush we're going to take some edible glue, and I'm going to paint along the edge, the thick edge, slightly up there and slightly up there, about halfway up the other end, so I've got it all the way along there. Then I'm going to take my hooked wire and I'm going to bend this around, and I'm going to wrap that around the wire. So in actual fact I've made the first petal to open up, and it's a much more delicate centre than using that. So what happens next is you're going to turn it upside down, make sure that there is actually no paste sticking out, because if you leave anything on the bottom, when it dries it will be totally hard and it will go through any petals you're trying to mount onto it after that. So that actually forms your first bud, a very tight bud. To actually get the next layer, I'm going to cut one heart-shaped petal, roll a small piece of paste, quite finely, want it quite thin. I'm sure if it wasn't so warm, we don't use so much corn flour, but honestly it's quite warm today and the paste tends to be much softer, so it gets a little bit sticky, but it doesn't matter. So now I'm going to cut out a heart shape, making sure I get all the paste off around the edge. Take it through. Get into the habit of wrapping up your paste as soon as you've finished, because you'll soon find yourself going through vast quantities of flour paste if you don't. Then what I'm going to do next is I'm going to soften the edge of the paste, of the petal, and that will form the second row. So I get hold of my bud and I'm going to put some paste on it and mount it around that one. You can adjust the position of it until you've got it just right, and that's the second row. It's what we call the half bud, and that's, again, you've got to make sure that underneath is totally smooth. Make sure that you've got no pieces sticking out, because the next stage is we want to mount a calyx around it. I'll hang it upside down again. And then the next stage is to cut a calyx out of some green paste, and you can choose whether you're going to have a dark green or a light green. For this one I've actually used a gooseberry paste, and for the flower I've used a mulberry flower colouring paste, and it's it's a very good colour because you can actually put it as strongly or as lightly as you want to. So, and we're going to cut out our calyx and make sure it's cleanly cut. And then with this one just to show you another way that you can cut your calyx, I'm going to get a knife and I'm going to just cut around with it. So you can use scissors or you can use a knife, whichever you feel comfortable about. I've cut the calyx and I'm going to put it through. You'll see here that I've used a flat calyx, and this is a bit of a cheating way to do it, because it's a little bit quicker than using the cone of paste, and that will go onto it like that. And to make the seed pod on this one, I'm going to take a small piece of paste that's won't need quite so much. I'll make it into a little pea size. Thread it through and put it on the base, shape it, and you have a little bit of glue between it, and you have your seed pod. So that's a quicker way to make the calyx of the rose. Now we've got to the stage where the flower is dry. It's been mounted on its calyx and it's dry, and the centre has been actually glued into it. So it's just been glued into the centre, threaded through with our edible paste. So what we do is we take the centre and we thread it through the centre of that, which would help if I didn't have that piece on it. You thread it through the centre of that, and with some little bit of edible glue, put that in there, and you need to hold it for a little while, until it's just a few minutes until it sticks, and then hang it upside down to dry on your hanger. So we've got this far. So what we're going to do now, we need to colour it, because if you look at this one, you'll see that the edge of the petals are slightly shaded, and I've put a little bit of shading in the centre. And what we use is what we call petal dust. Now it comes in a file like this, and it's very, very strong. So if you really want a strong colour, it's fine, you can use it straight from the file. But if you just want a delicate shading and you're not sure how much you want, what we do, we put a little bit of it, say in a container, and mix some corn flour with it. And mix it up thoroughly, and then it will still tint whatever you want to do, but it's a little bit more gentle, and you've got a little bit more control over the colour. So what I'm going to do is just tint this slightly. So the edge of the petals we're going to tint with the pink, just so it's very delicate, because you don't want strong colour on this. And any surplus you can lift off. Got far more, I mean, if you used it neat from the file, then obviously you'll get a very, very strong tone. I mean, if you want red roses to be really, really red, then you can use it. It makes it really nice to shade. So if you go all the way around, and then you may feel you need a little bit in the centre. So I'm just going to put a tiny bit near to the centre there, just to lift it slightly. Tap off the surplus. Now, it's very nice if you've got this sort of flower is to actually make it shine slightly, and also to be able to set the colour on it so that it comes out to its full potential. And what we do is we steam it. But the thing is, you have to be very, very careful with it. You can't just hold it over the steam and hope it will be okay. It literally is flashed over the steam like that and underneath, and you'll find that that is enough. And it is now quite shiny. Now the next stage, I'll leave that one up there to dry because that obviously wants to dry for about an hour before you could use it. The next stage then is to show you how to actually make this little spray. Now the leaves you already know from the traditional rose, so I won't have to show you that again. And what I've done, I've coloured these slightly on the base with a little bit of brown and a tiny bit of yellow into it, just to give it a bit of shading, and each one slightly different because it just lifts it, gives it a bit of shadow. And you'll find that after steaming it, and you can see these are quite shiny after steaming, they make a very, very nice colouring for it. So we've got the two buds, which is the bud and the half bud, and the two blossoms, and we need to make it into that display there. This is this little display. So we start off with one of the leaves, and this one I'm going to actually tape so that I can mount it easily. So again, you know how to tape. It doesn't have to be thoroughly taped because it's already green, so it's just literally so it's easier for me to mount together. And you'll find they're very, very slippery otherwise, and it doesn't make it very easy to put them together. And I haven't actually put the I didn't just realise that I did not put the calyx on these buds, but I haven't actually put the calyx on these, the seed pod part of the calyx, mainly because you can't see it, because if it's in a display like that, you can't see it, so being quite lazy, I didn't do it. But if you want to be precise, you should put one on. So I'm going to start with this bud and the leaf, and just under the top leaf, I bring the top of the bud, and I'm going to tape that the way I showed you for the traditional rose, and I'm going to tape that together. And I've used quite a thin tape because then it won't build up in such a huge stem. Now the next one to go on is the half bud, slightly lower, just about halfway down that bud is the tip of that one, and I'm going to tape that one together. Again, I'm squeezing it together and going down with the tape. The next one is to put another leaf on that side. Now if you can see, the bottom of that leaf there is about the same level as the bottom of that stem. Just want to stagger it slightly. And I'm taping that together. Then the next one that goes on is the full rose, which again I've left that amount of space before I'm going to tape it, which is about 2 centimetres, and I'm going to again tape that on together and wind the tape round. Then the third leaf, need a bit more tape. The third leaf I'm going to bring down at the back of that, so that leaf and that stem is about equal. They're about equal distance away from each other. Again, I'm going to tape that on, and then the last rose, I'm going to put slightly lower down. So I'm taping it down there. The taping will come quite easy to you once you practice it. It's like everything else, you need some practice. So all my flowers are on this spray at the moment, so all I need to do now is to actually arrange them properly. So that side leaf can come down, that can go up there. And what I would do is cut the base off with a pair of wire cutters, and I'm going to then perhaps take a little bit of thicker tape and finish it off, because you don't want it to have any wires exposed when you put it on a cake, and that will finish it off just beautifully. So this is your completed spray, and if you've got two of them like I have here, it's really quite a beautiful display to put on top of a cake.